Brigadier General John Stark of New Hampshire assumed command of the Northern Army from Horatio Gates on April 17, 1778. After the attack against Cobleskill on May 30th, he decided that the region needed to be defended against future attacks and ordered Colonel Ichabod Alden to march his 7th Massachusetts to Cherry Valley. When Alden arrived at Cherry Valley with his regiment of approximately 300 Continental soldiers, on June 6, he found the inhabitants living in the church from protection from attack. Alden immediately ordered them to return to their homes. Shortly after, the regiment began building a more suitable palisaded fort, Fort Alden. Alden began sending out scouting parties to keep abreast of Joseph Brant's movements. The fort was finished in 2 months' time and mounted with cannon. On August 15th, it was christened Fort Alden, after their leader, Ichabod Alden. To the residents, the fort projected an air of confidence that the region was amply protected by the Army's strong presence. It was a show of aplomb that would be in 3 months proven to result in tragic events, which will forever be known as the Cherry Valley Massacre. And we are standing in the midst of Fort Alden in the town of Cherry Valley, New York. Church was located somewhere here where the inhabitants lived, housed themselves to protect themselves from Indian raids. Ichabod Alden came with his men. They built a fort, a palisaded fort, sent the men and the families back to their homes. Coming to November of 1778, though, there were reports that there was going to be a raid. Alden was notified by General Peter Gansevoort, saying we had received information about an impending attack on Cherry Valley and the inhabitants here in the fort and in the surrounding areas. Alden dismissed the information that was given to him, possibly because it was given by a kind of notorious man who didn't really have a reputable standing in the Continental Army and the leaders. Saucy Nicholas Sharp, came to General Gansevoort notifying him of what he had heard. But he also had another nickname, Saucy Nick, Saucy. He also had an Indian name, Lagatatu, which means he who continues to speak. So you take those two names, Saucy, likes to speak, keeps talking, makes up stories. So his name and his reputation was not taken for much stock here in Cherry Valley. So on November 11th, the Cherry Valley Massacre took place because nobody was in the fort. They were all in private homes around the surrounding area here in Cherry Valley. Looking south here toward the Wells home where the attack began, Ichabod Alden was housed at the Wells house. We're going to be going there next for another video, so stay tuned for part 2. He made a run for it, about a quarter of a mile away. He made a run for it, for the fort, which is located right where we're standing here, and across the road in the cemetery now, located where the fort was located, where the palisaded fort was. Alden made a run for it. He turned and shot at an Indian that was chasing him. His gun jammed. Indian pulled out his tomahawk, threw it at Alden, hitting him in the head, killing him. Now, some report that the Indian was Joseph Brant, who was a friend and an acquaintance of Alden. He went up to Alden, scalped him, and then headed back to the Wells home. Again, to the south of the village. Now, during this attack, Alden, very remiss on protecting the men and the community members of Cherry Valley. But also, Joseph Brant was not in charge of this attack. That was left to a man named Walter Butler, son of John Butler, who was the head of the Butler's Rangers, who had harassed and looted the Mohawk Valley for the past couple of years before this attack. Grant did all he could to defend and protect the citizens of the community. In fact, the Wells family were friends with John Butler, Walter Butler's father. But the whole Wells family was killed. Over that way about a mile is the Dunlap marker. Now that marker represents another attack that was on the Dunlap family. So the Cherry Valley Massacre, November 11, 1778. That coupled with the Wyoming Valley Massacre, which took place near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in the summer, actually it was on July 4th, 1778, led up to General George Washington, commander of the Continental Army, deciding to take his army in August of 1779 from Cooperstown, which is south of here. General Clinton started on that. He started actually in Canajoharie, which is about that way, about 10 miles. Came to Cooperstown and settled on at Seagull Lake. Dammed up at Seagull Lake at the far end where the Susquehanna River begins. And then in August, he broke the dam. They blew it up with cannons, and it caused a tidal wave basically to send their bateaus, many bateaus, down the Susquehanna River. Meeting up eventually in a couple of weeks with General John Sullivan's army, who was coming up from Athens, Pennsylvania. They met up at a place called Newtown, modern-day Elmira. The Battle of Newtown, the only major battle to take place during the General Clinton and Sullivan expedition, took place in August of 1779. And from there, Clinton and Sullivan worked their way up through the Finger Lakes, destroying all the Indian villages, the Indian crops, anything they could that would help the Native Americans make it through that winter. But the Cherry Valley Massacre here was one of the catalysts of that campaign. Cherry Valley is a small, quiet town now. Well, I say that, and here's a sickle coming by. But it's a quiet, small town between Cooperstown and the Mohawk Valley. Traveling down Route 166 south, heading towards Cooperstown, eventually Oneonta. But Brant and his men, under the orders of Walter Butler, came what they call the Unadilla Trail, which is down that way by the Wells home, the Wells marker. And they came up from central New York, down near Unadilla on the Susquehanna River and the Unadilla River. Now, Brant had headquarters in Unadilla, Old Unadilla, which is Sydney, New York now, and Anaquaga, which is near Windsor, New York. And he came up this way with Walter Butler, Tories, many Seneca Indians, and the Seneca Indians were savage. They were the ruthless of the Iroquois, the Five Nations of the Haudenosaunee. So Cherry Valley Massacre, a piece of American Revolutionary War history that should not be forgotten on both sides. Ichabod Alden, leader. Clyde, last name Clyde, one of his colonels. Campbells were all residents of this area, members of this community, and they all fought against the British Army and the Loyalists in what became known as the Cherry Valley Massacre.